Before flea bombs, foggers, and monthly chemical treatments, people dealt with a flea problem using a shallow dish of water, a drop of dish soap, and a lamp left on overnight, and it worked well enough that the trick got passed down through generations of farmhouses and old apartments alike. Meanwhile, a lot of households today are spending real money on sprays and chemical treatments for a problem this old method handled for pennies. Over the next 20 minutes, I'll walk through exactly why this trick works, how to set it up properly, where it fits alongside everything else you're probably already doing to deal with fleas in the house, and a handful of other old, chemical-free habits that go alongside it for anyone dealing with a real infestation rather than just an occasional bite. None of what's coming requires a trip to a specialty store or a subscription treatment plan, and most of it you probably already have sitting in a kitchen cabinet right now. Quick note before we continue. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe, since we cover a different old household trick like this one every single week. Let's get into the soap trap. Water on its own has a property called surface tension, which is basically a thin skin formed by water molecules pulling tightly against each other at the surface. That skin is strong enough that small, lightweight insects can actually land on water and walk across it without sinking, the same way a water strider skates across a pond. A flea that jumps into a plain bowl of water can sometimes bounce right back out or stay afloat long enough to climb free, which is exactly the problem with just leaving a bowl of water sitting around. A single drop of dish soap breaks that surface tension almost instantly, since soap molecules wedge themselves between the water molecules and disrupt the tight surface layer they were forming together. Once that skin is broken, anything that lands on the water sinks straight through instead of floating, and a flea that would have hopped right back out of plain water gets pulled under within seconds. This is the entire mechanism behind the trick, and it's the same reason dish soap is used to break up oil slicks and clean greasy dishes, since it's disrupting the surface tension and structure of whatever it touches. Fleas are drawn toward light and warmth, especially at night when a room goes dark and a single lamp becomes the brightest and warmest point around. This is part of why they gravitate toward legs and ankles in a lit room in the first place, since body heat and movement both register on their sensors. A shallow dish of soapy water placed directly under a lamp, especially overnight when the rest of the house is dark and still, becomes the most attractive spot in the room for any flea that's active and jumping around looking for a host. Fleas also jump reflexively toward any small disturbance in light or vibration nearby, which is why placing the trap on the floor near furniture, carpet edges, or pet bedding, the exact places fleas tend to hide during the day, gives it a much better chance of actually catching something overnight than setting it out in the middle of an open room. Fleas are also most active during the hours a house goes quiet, generally overnight when foot traffic stops and the temperature in a room settles, which is exactly why this trick is traditionally set up in the evening and checked the next morning, rather than run during the day when the household is moving around and creating constant disturbance that scatters fleas in every direction instead of toward a single light source. To build the trap, take a shallow dish or a wide, low bowl, fill it about halfway with warm water, and add a few drops of plain dish soap, stirring gently so it mixes through rather than just floating on top in a single spot. Warm water works slightly better than cold, since fleas are drawn toward warmth, and a warm dish gives off a bit of that heat signature into the surrounding air. Place a small lamp or a desk light directly above or right next to the dish, angled so the light reflects visibly off the water's surface, and turn off any other lights in the room so this becomes the single brightest point fleas can detect. Set it up in the evening in whichever room has the worst flea activity, usually wherever pets sleep or spend most of their time, and leave it running overnight. In the morning, check the dish for tiny dark specks floating on the surface or sitting at the bottom, which confirms the trap actually worked. Then dump it out, rinse the dish, and reset it fresh the following night if the problem hasn't cleared up yet. A wide, shallow dish like a pie plate or a cake pan tends to outperform a narrow bowl, since it gives fleas a bigger target to land on from a jump, and a plain white or light-colored dish makes it easier to spot any specks caught overnight compared to a dark-colored one. The whole setup takes under 2 minutes and uses nothing beyond a dish, some water, a drop of dish soap, and a lamp most households already have plugged in somewhere in the house. It's worth being direct about the limits here, since a soap trap only catches adult fleas that are already active and jumping around at the time it's set out. Flea eggs, larvae, and pupae, which typically make up a large majority of a flea population at any given moment, are completely unaffected by a dish of water sitting on the floor, since they're usually buried deep in carpet fibers, bedding, or cracks in flooring where the trap never reaches them. This means the trick works best as one part of a broader routine, rather than a single fix on its own. Vacuuming carpets, rugs, and pet bedding thoroughly and frequently physically removes eggs and larvae before they mature, and washing pet bedding in hot water on a regular basis handles a similar share of the problem. The soap trap's real value is in catching the active adult fleas night after night, which reduces how many eggs get laid in the first place, and steadily brings the overall population down when it's run consistently alongside regular vacuuming rather than used once and forgotten. To understand why one soap trap alone can't fully solve a flea problem, it helps to know what's actually happening beneath the surface of a carpet or under a couch. An adult flea can lay somewhere around 20 to 30 eggs a day, and those eggs aren't sticky, so they fall off a pet's fur wherever the animal walks, sleeps, or rests, scattering across carpet fibers, cracks in wood flooring, and the seams of upholstered furniture. Within a few days, those eggs hatch into larvae, which actively avoid light and burrow deeper into carpet fibers or soil, feeding on organic debris and the droppings adult fleas leave behind. After a week or two, larvae spin a cocoon and enter a pupal stage, and this is the most frustrating part of the cycle, since a flea pupa can sit dormant for weeks or even months, essentially waiting for a signal like vibration, warmth, or carbon dioxide from a nearby host before it hatches into a biting adult. This is exactly why a house can seem flea-free for a while, and then suddenly have an active problem again after someone's been away, since all it takes is footsteps or body heat to trigger a wave of pupae hatching at once. Understanding this cycle is why the soap trap works best as a nightly habit over several weeks rather than a one-time setup, since it's steadily removing new adults as they emerge from that hidden pupal stage in the background. The soap trap isn't the only trick households leaned on before chemical treatments became common. Plain table salt sprinkled generously into carpet fibers and left for a day or two before vacuuming thoroughly works similarly to diatomaceous earth by drying out flea eggs and larvae on contact, since salt pulls moisture out of anything it touches. Food-grade diatomaceous earth, made from fossilized algae ground into a fine powder, does much the same thing but more effectively, working by cutting into the waxy outer coating of flea eggs and larvae so they lose moisture and die, and it's been used this way in barns and farmhouses for a very long time. Cedar chips and cedar oil have a long history as a natural flea deterrent too, since fleas tend to avoid the scent, which is part of why cedar-lined pet beds and cedar chips scattered near entryways were common in older homes. Some households also swore by a diluted lemon spray, made by steeping sliced lemons in boiling water overnight and spraying the cooled liquid onto pet bedding and baseboards, on the idea that fleas dislike the citrus oils released during steeping. None of these replace consistent vacuuming, but combined with the nightly soap trap, they round out a fuller, chemical-free approach to the problem. If you're using diatomaceous earth, make sure it's specifically labeled food grade rather than the pool grade version, since pool grade diatomaceous earth is processed differently and can irritate lungs if it becomes airborne, while food grade is safe enough to use around pets and children as long as it's kept out of the eyes and away from direct inhalation. Whichever powder option you choose, working it gently into the base of the carpet fibers with a broom before leaving it to sit gives it much better contact with any eggs or larvae hiding down near the carpet backing rather than just sitting on top of the fibers where it does very little. Sunlight and heat do a surprising amount of work against fleas at every stage of their life cycle. Pet bedding, rugs, and blankets left out in direct sun for a few hours periodically helps dry out and kill both eggs and larvae hiding in the fabric, since fleas at every life stage are vulnerable to prolonged heat and dryness. Washing pet bedding in hot water on a weekly basis during an active flea problem removes a large share of eggs and larvae before they ever get the chance to mature into biting adults. Vacuuming deserves special attention here too, since the vibration from a vacuum can actually trigger dormant pupae to hatch, which sounds like a downside but is actually useful, because it pulls fleas out of their dormant stage and into a state where they can be removed, rather than leaving them to hatch on their own schedule later. After vacuuming during an active flea problem, emptying the canister or sealing the bag and taking it straight outside to the trash matters, since fleas and eggs pulled up by the vacuum can sometimes survive and crawl back out of an indoor bin if it's left sitting inside. A meaningful share of household flea problems start outside before they ever reach a carpet or a pet bed. Keeping grass mowed short and clearing brush piles, leaf litter, and wood piles away from the house removes the shaded, humid spots fleas and the wildlife that carry them tend to favor. Areas where a pet spends a lot of time outdoors, like a favorite shaded spot under a porch or a regular napping patch in the yard, are worth treating with diatomaceous earth or a light salting during an active flea season, since these become natural gathering points the same way indoor pet bedding does. Keeping outdoor cats, stray animals, and wildlife like raccoons or opossums from having easy access to crawl spaces or porches also cuts down on how many fleas get introduced to a property in the first place, since fleas typically hitch a ride in on an animal rather than appearing out of nowhere. A few small adjustments make a noticeable difference in how many fleas the trap actually catches. Running 2 or 3 dishes at once in different rooms, rather than relying on a single trap for the whole house, covers more territory and catches fleas that might otherwise migrate to an untreated room overnight. Placing a trap low to the ground, right at floor level rather than up on a table or counter, matters more than people expect, since fleas rarely jump high enough to reach a raised surface, and the trap needs to sit at the height where fleas are actually active. Some households add a small amount of sugar to the water alongside the soap, since fleas are drawn slightly to sweetness as well as light and warmth, though the light and warmth combination does the majority of the work on its own. Running the trap for several consecutive nights, rather than just one, gives a much clearer picture of whether the flea problem is actually improving, since a declining number of fleas caught each morning is a solid sign the population is shrinking rather than holding steady. Commercial flea treatments and foggers work by dispersing chemical insecticides throughout a room or directly onto pets, and while they're often effective, they come with real considerations around pets, small children, and anyone with respiratory sensitivities in the house, along with an ongoing cost every time a treatment needs reapplying. The soap trap costs essentially nothing to run night after night, uses 2 things already sitting in most kitchens, and doesn't put any chemical residue into carpets, bedding, or the air a household is breathing. It's not meant to replace a full flea treatment plan if an infestation is already serious, but as a low-cost, chemical-free way to knock down the active adult population every single night, while other methods handle the eggs and larvae, it's held up as a reliable household trick for a very long time, long before flea sprays and foggers existed as an option at all. There's also something to be said for a method that any household, in any decade, could set up with whatever was already in the kitchen, without needing to drive anywhere or wait for a delivery. Farmhouses running this exact setup 100 years ago didn't have a name for surface tension or a scientific explanation for why it worked. They just knew that a dish left out under a lamp caught fleas by morning, and passed that knowledge down the same way they passed down which plants kept moths out of a closet. A shallow dish of water, a drop of soap, and a lamp left on overnight is about as simple as a household fix gets, and it's still doing real work in plenty of homes that have never needed anything more expensive than that to keep a flea problem under control. Pair it with regular vacuuming and washing pet bedding in hot water, and most flea problems come down noticeably within a couple of weeks, usually with a visible drop in how many fleas turn up in the dish each morning as the population thins out. Add in a bit of diatomaceous earth or salt on the carpet and some attention to what's happening right outside the door, and there's rarely a need to reach for a can of chemical spray at all. Subscribe if you haven't yet, since we've got another one of these old, forgotten household tricks coming next week. Let me know in the comments if you've tried this one before, or if there's an old trick your family used that you'd like us to cover. I'll see you in the next one.